Imagine stepping into a crowded room. To the untrained eye, it is just a sea of faces, polite laughter, and casual networking. But to you, it is a battlefield of invisible frequencies. Within 3 seconds, without trying, you have already mapped the hidden architecture of the room. You see the subtle micro-expression of contempt on the manager's face as his colleague speaks. You register the asymmetric shrug of the man in the corner, a clear indicator of low confidence hiding behind an expensive suit. You feel the heavy, oppressive gravity of a highly manipulative individual scouting the room for their next emotional host. Most people call this a vibe. They call it intuition, or being highly sensitive. Let's stop using soft words for tactical advantages. What you possess is not a fragile curse. It is a highly sophisticated organic tracking system. You are a biological radar. But here is the brutal truth that no one is willing to tell you. If you do not know how to calibrate this radar, you are not a tracker. You are a target. The social predators of this world, the narcissists, the Machiavellians, the emotional parasites, they can spot an untrained empath from across a crowded football field. They do not see your kindness, they see a free source of fuel. They see a back door into your psyche that you have left wide open because you've been taught that your sensitivity is a weakness you must politely manage. You have been lied to. You have been told to open your heart and empathize with everyone. That is a fast track to emotional bankruptcy and psychological capture. Today, we are deleting that software. We are going to deconstruct the hidden, unspoken operational code of the Lone Wolf Empath. This is not about healing your inner child, and it is not about finding your tribe. It is about becoming the most psychologically secure, unmanipulable force in any room you ever walk into. It is about taking the very trait that has made you a target for years and turning it into an absolute, impenetrable shield. If you have ever felt completely drained by the presence of others, if you have ever felt the crushing weight of a room's unspoken tension, or if you have found yourself constantly isolated because the world simply feels too loud, pay close attention. In the next few minutes, we are going to lay bare the 5 non-negotiable protocols of the unspoken code. If you miss even one of these laws, you leave a critical vulnerability in your mental armor, one that the next manipulator you meet will exploit without hesitation. Let us begin. There is a silent contract you signed the moment you realized you could feel the unspoken undercurrents of the human mind. You didn't ask for it. You were simply born with a nervous system that registers the micro-tremors of human deception, pain, and intent. For the first half of your life, this felt like an open wound. You absorbed the anger of your parents, the anxiety of your friends, and the hidden malice of your enemies. You thought something was wrong with you because you needed to run away, to hide, to seek the cold comfort of isolation just to hear your own thoughts. I am here to tell you that nothing is wrong with you. You were simply operating a highly complex weapon without the instruction manual. The Lone Wolf Empath is the most dangerous entity a psychological predator can encounter, but only when that empath operates by the unspoken code. If you do not master these rules, you will remain the prey. If you master them, you become completely invisible to those who wish to use you, and utterly immovable to those who try to shake you. The untrained empath reacts to feelings. The Lone Wolf Empath observes data. When you walk into a room and feel an overwhelming wave of anxiety or hostility, your instinct is to internalize it. You ask yourself, why am I feeling this? From this moment on, you change the question. You ask, what is this environment trying to tell me? You do not absorb the energy, you calibrate it. If someone enters your space dripping with toxic, manipulative intent, you do not adjust your emotional frequency to accommodate them. You watch their micro-expressions, their vocal tone, and their posture. You treat their emotional output as a biological footprint. The moment you treat an emotional attack as clinical data, the predator loses all power over you. You are no longer their victim, you are their investigator. Let's dismantle a common myth. Isolation is not a weakness. It is your primary operational reset. A lone wolf does not run with the pack because the pack is loud, chaotic, and driven by low-level survival instincts. The pack requires conformity. For you, solitude is the laboratory where you clean your instruments. When you isolate, you are stripping away the emotional static of everyone else's demands, fears, and projections. Never apologize for your absence. Never feel guilty for turning off your phone, locking your door, and disappearing for days. It is not selfish, it is maintenance. If you do not regularly purge the emotional residue of the world, your radar will become cluttered. And a cluttered radar is how you miss the warning signs of a threat. Most people think a boundary is something you shout. They think it's an argument, a rule set you hand to someone else, or a dramatic confrontation. That is amateur behavioral design. A true boundary is silent, swift, and absolute. It requires zero explanation. If a highly manipulative individual attempts to gaslight you, violate your peace, or exploit your empathy, you do not argue. You do not explain why their behavior is hurtful. Why? Because explanation is leverage. The moment you explain your boundary, you are handing them a map of your vulnerabilities. Instead, you execute the quiet exit. You simply withdraw your attention, your energy, and your presence. If they cross the line, they no longer get access to you. No fights, no grand exits, just a cold, clean, permanent disconnect. Let them scream into the void you left behind. Empathy is often painted as a soft, gentle virtue, but real empathy, deep, piercing empathy, is a razor-sharp scalpel. Because you can feel what others are hiding, you know exactly where their deepest insecurities lie. You know the exact lie they are telling themselves to sleep at night. The Lone Wolf Empath does not use this knowledge to hurt people maliciously, but they keep it in reserve as ultimate psychological leverage. When a manipulator tries to corner you, you do not shrink. You look them dead in the eye, and with absolute calm, you reflect their deepest, unvarnished truth back to them. You don't need to yell, you simply state the reality they are trying so hard to hide. When a predator realizes that you see right through their mask, that their armor is completely transparent to you, their survival instinct will force them to back down. They will seek easier prey. The final code is the absolute refusal to be responsible for the emotional survival of others. You cannot save people who are actively trying to drown you so they can use you as a raft. Your empathy is a finite, precious resource. It belongs to you, and it is reserved exclusively for those who have earned the right to experience it through mutual respect, consistency, and safety. If someone chooses to live in chaos, let them. If someone chooses to destroy themselves, let them do it without you. You are an empath, not a savior. Your highest duty is to the sovereignty of your own mind. Maintain your baseline. Protect your silence. Live by the code. To truly understand cold calibration, we have to strip away the pop psychology notion that empathy is a soft, passive sponge that just absorbs whatever emotional waste is thrown its way. The untrained empath walks into a room and instantly registers the anxiety, the hidden hostility, or the predatory intent of another person. But instead of analyzing it, they internalize it. They begin to run an internal program that asks, why am I feeling this anxiety? What did I do wrong? How do I fix this room to make myself feel safe again? This is a critical operational error. The moment you ask those questions, you have accepted ownership of a feeling that does not belong to you. You have allowed someone else's internal state to hijack your nervous system. The Lone Wolf Empath, operating under the unspoken code, does the exact opposite. They utilize a protocol of clinical observation. When they step into a space and feel that heavy, low-frequency shift in their chest, they do not panic, and they do not try to appease the room. They immediately switch their brain from feeling mode to calibration mode. They treat the incoming emotional wave not as a personal crisis, but as raw, high-value behavioral intelligence. When you calibrate coldly, you become a human biometric sensor. You look at the person emitting the tension and you run a rapid, passive baseline assessment. You notice the slight tightening of the muscles around their eyes, the orbicularis oculi, which tells you their polite smile is completely manufactured. You listen to the subtle, sharp inhalation of breath before they speak, registering their underlying hostility. You observe the slight angle of their torso, pointing toward the exit or toward a person of high social status, revealing their immediate agenda. By converting emotional static into objective data points, you build an impenetrable cognitive barrier between their sickness and your sanity. You are essentially taking the emotional energy they are radiating, running it through an intellectual filter, and translating it into a list of cold facts. Subject is displaying high status signaling, but possesses low baseline confidence. Subject is attempting to dominate the conversation through interruptive speech patterns. Subject is hunting for a psychological hook. This shift in perspective changes everything because human behavior operates on feedback loops. A psychological predator or a manipulator relies entirely on your emotional reaction to gain leverage. They need you to feel anxious, eager to please, or defensive. When they project their toxic energy at you, they expect you to bend. But when you meet that projection with cold, unblinking calibration, the feedback loop breaks. You are not reflecting their anger, nor are you absorbing it. You are simply watching it with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a specimen under a microscope. They will sense this immediately. There is nothing more unnerving to a manipulator than a target who refuses to play the emotional game. They will feel the shift in the air when their unspoken pressure tactics slide right off you. You are no longer an open target waiting to be drained. You have become a mirror that reflects their own pathology back at them. You are operating from a place of absolute situational awareness, reading their hidden indicators while keeping your own baseline completely flat. This is how you turn a highly sensitive nervous system from a vulnerability into your greatest tactical advantage. Strategic isolation is the foundational protocol that keeps the lone wolf empath from burning out and losing their edge. The modern world operates at an intense, non-stop psychological frequency, demanding that you constantly broadcast your energy while absorbing the unedited noise of everyone around you. To the average person, being alone is a terrifying prospect, a state of loneliness to be avoided at all costs by plugging into social media or crowded rooms. But for the lone wolf empath, isolation is not a symptom of depression, nor is it a defensive retreat from reality. It is a mandatory operational reset, a high-level maintenance window where you deliberately cut the feed to the outside world to purge external emotional feedback loops and recalibrate your internal baseline. When you spend extended periods around other human beings, your highly sensitive nervous system acts like a hard drive running a massive background script. Without your conscious permission, you are collecting the anxiety of your coworkers, the micro-resentments of your friends, and the predatory projections of the manipulators you encounter. If you do not disconnect, this accumulated psychological static builds up until it clouds your judgment, dulls your intuition, and leaves you vulnerable. You begin to mistake other people's fears for your own, and you start making decisions based on their emotional gravity rather than your own internal truth. Strategic isolation is the process of pulling the plug on that entire network, walking into the dark room of your own mind and clearing the cache. During this period of absolute solitude, your brain finally stops processing foreign data. The biological radar that you are constantly running drops its screens, allowing your nervous system to cool down. It is in this quiet space that you find your true north again. You learn to distinguish between what you actually think and what the room wanted you to think. You strip away the subtle compliance programming that society tries to install in you every single day. This is why you must never apologize for your absence or feel a single ounce of guilt when you decide to disappear. The people around you will often try to weaponize your need for space, labeling you as cold, distant, or antisocial because they rely on your presence to stabilize themselves. They want access to your empathy to soothe their own chaos, but you must realize that you owe no one a constant connection at the expense of your own psychological sovereignty. True power is born in this detached stillness. When you master the art of being entirely self-contained, you develop an immense level of psychological immunity. You stop caring about social validation because you have built an internal ecosystem that does not require external fuel to survive. When you finally choose to step back out of your isolation and re-enter the social arena, you do so with a razor-sharp mind and a perfectly calibrated intuition. You see the games people play with absolute crystal-clear definition because you are no longer entangled in their web. You become completely unmanipulable simply because you have proven to yourself that you can walk away from the table entirely and be perfectly fine on your own. Isolation is your armory, the place where you forge your mental boundaries and sharpen your analytical tools, turning your sensitivity from an exposed nerve into an impenetrable shield. The protocol of the silent boundary is where most highly sensitive people completely fail, because they have been conditioned to believe that setting a boundary requires an explanation, a speech, or a dramatic confrontation. They think they need to sit the toxic person down and explain exactly how their actions cause pain, hoping that through sheer emotional transparency, the other person will suddenly experience an epiphany and change. This is a massive tactical blunder when dealing with high-tier manipulators and emotional predators. The moment you voice your boundary, the moment you explain why something hurt you or what you will not tolerate, you are not protecting yourself. You are actively handing the predator a detailed, high-definition schematic of your psychological vulnerabilities. You are telling them exactly where your strings are, how hard they need to pull them, and what specific behaviors provoke an emotional reaction out of you. The Lone Wolf Empath does not announce their boundaries, they execute them. A true boundary is an internal law, a non-negotiable operational script that runs automatically without requiring the other person's consent, understanding, or agreement. It is entirely one-sided. When someone crosses a line, attempts to gaslight you, or seeks to exploit your empathy for their own validation, you do not argue, you do not yell, and you do not threaten. You simply withdraw your presence, your attention, and your energy. You apply a cold, immediate, and permanent disconnect. If you are in a conversation and someone begins to use subtle manipulation tactics, you do not call them out to start a debate. You simply change the subject, end the interaction, or walk away. You do not owe anyone an explanation for protecting your own psychological peace. This silent execution is incredibly jarring to a manipulator because they feed entirely on emotional feedback loops. They want you to get angry, they want you to defend yourself, and they want you to engage in a back and forth argument. Because as long as you are talking, you are still invested in the dynamic. You are still giving them your most valuable asset, your attention. When you deploy the silent boundary, you deny them that fuel completely. You leave them screaming into an absolute vacuum. They are left trying to figure out exactly what happened, but because you gave them no words, no tears, and no anger, they have zero leverage to work with. They cannot twist your words if you do not speak. They cannot gaslight your feelings if you do not share them. You must realize that explanation is a form of submission. It implies that the other person has the right to judge whether your boundary is valid or not. By remaining entirely silent and adjusting your behavior rather than your words, you maintain absolute control over the situation. You are setting the terms of engagement through action alone. If a person proves themselves to be unsafe, untrustworthy, or toxic, their access to your life is revoked instantly and quietly. No grand exits, no long text messages detailing your grievances, and no second chances born out of guilt. You simply fade out of their orbit, leaving them behind with nothing but the consequence of their own behavior. This clean, surgical extraction is the ultimate manifestation of self-ownership, ensuring that your mental environment remains entirely secure and that no predator can ever find a foothold in your reality. Weaponizing the truth is the exact moment the lone wolf empath shifts from a defensive posture to absolute psychological dominance. For too long, you have been told that your deep perception is meant solely for healing, comforting, and absorbing the broken pieces of others. But when you are dealing with a psychological predator, a chronic gaslighter, or a covert narcissist, your ability to see past the mask is not a tool for empathy. It is a high-caliber precision weapon. Because your nervous system naturally tracks the hidden undercurrents of human behavior, you don't just see what people are doing, you see why they are doing it. You register the exact insecurity they are trying to overcompensate for, the deep-seated fear of abandonment driving their aggression, and the foundational lie they have constructed to protect their fragile ego. You hold a complete psychological map of their internal vulnerabilities, and knowing how to strategically deploy that map is what changes the game entirely. A manipulator operates by creating an artificial reality, a carefully curated theater where they control the narrative and keep you off balance. They expect you to play along with the script, to shrink under their projection, or to buy into their false confidence. When you weaponize the truth, you refuse to validate the theater. You do not get emotional, you do not yell, and you do not engage in their petty framing. Instead, you look directly past the performance, straight into the hidden reality of who they are, and you speak that reality aloud with absolute icy calm. You do not do this with malice or dramatic flair, because emotion weakens the delivery. You state the truth as a cold, undeniable matter of fact, stripping away their mask in a single surgical sentence. When you calmly look a manipulator in the eye and say, "You are raising your voice right now because you feel like you are losing control of this conversation," or "You are trying to make me look incompetent because you are terrified of being exposed yourself," the dynamic fractures instantly. This is an incredibly terrifying experience for a psychological predator. They are used to operating in the dark, using smoke and mirrors to distort your perception. The moment you shine a blinding clinical spotlight directly on their hidden motive, their entire system goes into shock. They realize their armor is completely transparent to you. They realize that every trick, every subtle guilt trip, and every gaslighting tactic they try to deploy is being intercepted and decoded in real time. By reflecting their unvarnished reality back to them without an ounce of fear or anger, you destroy their leverage. They cannot manipulate someone who sees their hidden blueprint. They will immediately recognize that continuing to target you carries an immense psychological risk to their own ego, because every time they attack, you will simply peel back another layer of their deception and expose it. This is not about being cruel. It is about establishing an absolute boundary of psychological deterrence. You are teaching the predator that your empathy is backed by a lethal level of awareness. When they realize that trying to play games with you will only result in their own deepest insecurities being laid bare. Their survival instinct will kick in, and they will back away to look for a much easier, less dangerous target. The monarchy of self-ownership is the ultimate realization of the lone wolf empath's power, representing the complete and total refusal to be held hostage by the emotional survival of other people. Throughout your life, you have likely been conditioned by a society that exploits your natural sensitivity, teaching you that because you can feel the pain of others, you are somehow obligated to fix it. You have been taught that your value is tied to your utility as an emotional sponge, a savior, or a dumping ground for the psychological waste of everyone around you. This is the ultimate trap. The moment you accept the premise that you are responsible for managing another adult's emotional state, you have voluntarily surrendered your psychological sovereignty. You have placed their chaotic internal environment above your own sanity, allowing them to dictate your peace, your energy, and your focus. The unspoken code demands that you establish an absolute monarchy over your own mind. This means realizing that you cannot save people who are actively choosing to drown, especially when they are trying to drag you under to use you as a temporary life raft. There is a profound difference between healthy compassion and codependent martyrdom. A psychological predator or an emotionally volatile individual will deliberately manufacture crises and project their suffering outward, hunting for an empathetic host to absorb the impact of their poor choices. They do not want to change, and they do not want to heal. They simply want relief from the consequences of their own actions, and they want you to pay the emotional price for it. When you operate under the law of self-ownership, you look at their self-inflicted chaos, and you make a conscious, clinical decision to let them sit in it alone. You must understand that your empathy is a finite, precious resource, not an open public utility. It is a highly secured asset that belongs exclusively to you, and it must be reserved solely for those who have earned the right to experience it through mutual respect, emotional maturity, and consistency. If someone chooses to live a life of constant, unevolved drama, if they refuse to do the heavy lifting required to heal themselves, or if they consistently weaponize their vulnerability to guilt trip you into compliance, you must exercise the absolute right of refusal. You let them fail. You let them hit rock bottom. You let them experience the unedited weight of their own behavior without stepping in to cushion the blow. This is not cruelty. It is the highest form of reality-based boundary setting. By reclaiming your emotional labor, you break the cycle of parasitic dependence. You stop allowing external emergencies to dictate your internal baseline. When you fully step into the monarchy of self-ownership, you develop an unshakable sense of grounding because your emotional equilibrium is no longer up for public debate or negotiation. You become entirely self-contained, answering only to the laws of your own psychological well-being and protecting your mental peace with a fierce, uncompromising intensity.